Jackson stood at the edge of the alien planet, his boots sinking slightly into the soft, strange ground. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, and towering trees stretched into the sky like sentinels. He had never seen anything like this before. This was a world untouched by humans, a place full of mysteries and possibly dangers. He was on a mission, a simple scouting task: gather information about the alien civilizations that inhabited this planet. His orders were clear, but there was something more about this world, something that made him uneasy. The planet was silent, almost too silent. There were no signs of conflict, no signs of life. He had expected more activity. Then he saw her. Lyra stood just beyond the tree line, her posture regal, her eyes scanning him as if she had known he was coming all along. She was tall, with long silver hair that shimmered in the light, and her skin had a soft, bluish hue. Her eyes were an intense shade of violet, a color that Jackson had never seen before in any human or alien race. The way she carried herself made it clear that she was no ordinary being. She was powerful, commanding. Her presence seemed to demand attention, even from a distance. Jackson straightened himself, unsure of what to do. In his years of military training, he had never encountered anything like this. It was always humans versus aliens, soldiers against soldiers. But here he was, facing someone who was not just an alien, but an entirely different kind of being, an entity that seemed far beyond the reach of any human understanding. Lyra's gaze never left him as she walked toward him, her steps graceful but purposeful. When she stopped just a few feet away, she looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "You stand before me, human," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "Bow, human." Jackson blinked, taken aback. He wasn't sure if he had heard her correctly. Bow. He was a soldier, a trained fighter, not someone who bowed to anyone. He had faced wars, alien monsters, and dangerous forces, but never had he been told to bow before an alien, especially not one as imposing as her. Yet, as her words lingered in the air, Jackson felt a strange pull inside of him. Something in the way she spoke, something in her presence, made him pause. It wasn't fear. It was something else, something deeper. His body tensed, fighting the instinct to resist. He had been trained not to bow, not to show weakness. But as he looked into her eyes, he felt a rush of emotion, a feeling he couldn't explain. It was as if he had been waiting for this moment, though he couldn't understand why. Despite his pride, something told him that this moment, this encounter, was far more than a simple order. It was an invitation. Jackson hesitated for a moment longer before slowly lowering himself into a bow, keeping his eyes locked on hers. To his surprise, he felt a strange sense of peace as he did. There was something about the act, something about the way Lyra watched him, that made him feel understood. He couldn't explain it. He simply knew that, in that moment, he was where he was meant to be. Lyra's expression softened ever so slightly, though she did not speak. She simply stood there, watching him, as if measuring the man before her. Jackson rose back to his feet, still feeling the weight of the moment. Something had changed. He didn't fully understand it, but he could sense that this encounter was only the beginning of something much larger, something he had been waiting for, without even knowing it. The days that followed Jackson's first encounter with Lyra were filled with tension. At first, he had tried to focus on his mission, gathering information, staying alert, but he couldn't shake the memory of her eyes, the command in her voice, and the strange feeling that had washed over him when he bowed. Lyra had been watching him closely ever since. He could feel it. Whether it was the way she moved in his presence or how she asked questions, there was always an unspoken challenge in the air. She was testing him, and he knew it. The alien woman wanted to see what he was made of, to understand if he was worthy of her attention. But Jackson wasn't sure how to prove himself to someone like her. One morning, as Jackson made his way to the camp he had set up, Lyra appeared before him again. She stood in the center of the clearing, her posture firm, her expression unreadable. "You've been sent here to observe us," Lyra said, her voice smooth but laced with authority. "But do you truly understand what that means, human? Are you capable of handling what you see?" Jackson's heart beat faster, but he didn't flinch. "I'm capable," he said, his voice steady. Lyra smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a strange thrill through him. "Good. Then you will face a test. Prove yourself worthy of the knowledge you seek." Jackson was about to ask what kind of test she meant when she motioned to a nearby rocky cliff. "Climb it. Reach the top. Do it within the hour, or you fail." The task seemed simple enough, but Jackson knew there was more to it. The cliff was tall and jagged, and the climb would not be easy. The challenge wasn't just physical. It was a test of his endurance, of his ability to push past his limits, and he had a feeling it was also a test of his will. Lyra stood watching, her eyes never leaving him as Jackson moved toward the cliff. He took a deep breath and started climbing, his hands finding cracks in the stone, his feet searching for footholds. His muscles burned almost immediately, but he gritted his teeth and continued. The rocks were sharp, the wind strong, but Jackson refused to stop. Every time he reached a ledge, he pulled himself up, determined to reach the top before the hour was over. Lyra's voice echoed from below, cutting through the wind. "Do you think you can defeat this task with brute strength alone, human? You must use more than your muscles." Jackson grunted but didn't look down. What did she mean? He was doing this the way he had been trained, using his strength and focus. But something in her words made him pause for just a moment, and that moment cost him. His hand slipped, and for a brief second, he felt his heart race as he struggled to find his grip. He cursed under his breath, but quickly regained his footing. The challenge wasn't just about climbing. It was about overcoming his own doubts. Lyra had tested him in ways he hadn't expected. Minutes later, with his muscles aching and sweat dripping down his face, Jackson reached the top. He looked down, his eyes locking onto Lyra's as she stood at the base, her arms crossed. She hadn't moved from her spot. He was breathing heavily, his body exhausted, but a sense of pride surged through him. He had done it. Lyra's voice rang out once more, this time softer. "You have passed the first test, human. But this is only the beginning." Jackson felt a strange rush of satisfaction. He had done more than climb a cliff. He had proven something to himself. But he knew that, for Lyra, this was just the first of many challenges. Jackson's heart still raced from the challenge, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between him and Lyra. The climb had been difficult, but not impossible. And yet it wasn't the physical test that lingered in his mind. It was the way Lyra had watched him, the quiet intensity in her gaze. There was something more there, something he couldn't put into words. That evening after the test, Jackson sat by the campfire, trying to relax. His muscles ached from the climb, and he let out a deep breath, staring into the flames. The fire crackled softly, but his mind was elsewhere, still caught in the memory of Lyra's eyes, how they never left him, even when he thought he was alone. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him. Without turning around, he knew it was her. "You climbed the cliff, human," Lyra said, her voice as calm as ever, though there was something different in the air tonight. "But the real challenge is not in your strength alone." Jackson slowly turned to face her. She stood just a few feet away, her silver hair flowing softly in the breeze. The moonlight cast a pale glow on her skin, making her look almost ethereal. Her eyes glinted in the darkness, like two bright stars. "I know," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about strength, is it? There's more to it." Lyra nodded, taking a step closer. "Yes, you must learn more than just how to climb. You must understand your place in this world, and how to respect the balance between us. Humans are different, but not less." Jackson swallowed. He hadn't expected her to be so open, so personal. Most aliens he'd encountered had only seen humans as invaders, as outsiders. But Lyra was different. She was powerful, yes, but there was something vulnerable about her too, something he hadn't expected. There was a long silence between them. Neither spoke, but the air felt charged, like there was something unsaid between them. Jackson could feel it, a tension that had been building since the first moment they met. It wasn't just the challenge, or the power she held. It was something deeper, something more human. Jackson found his eyes drifting to her lips for a brief second, then quickly pulling away. He cursed under his breath. What was he doing? He had no place thinking like that about her. She was an alien, a leader, someone who could command him with just a word. And yet, Lyra took another step closer, her eyes still locked onto his. "You think about me differently now," she said softly, almost as if reading his mind. Jackson blinked. "What?" She raised an eyebrow. "Your thoughts are not as hidden as you believe, but it is not a weakness, human. It is understanding." Jackson felt his breath catch in his throat. She was too close now, and he could feel the heat radiating off her. There was no denying it. He was attracted to her, in a way that made no sense. She was an alien, and he was just a soldier. And yet, in this moment, everything felt possible. Lyra finally broke the silence. "You've come a long way, Jackson, but there is more to learn, more to understand about us." Jackson nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood what she meant. But he knew one thing. Whatever came next, he wouldn't be able to ignore the connection between them. It was growing stronger with every moment they spent together. The days after their quiet exchange by the fire passed in a blur for Jackson. The challenge of the climb still weighed heavily on his mind. But there was something else now, a strange pull toward Lyra that he couldn't ignore. Every time she spoke to him, every glance they shared, felt like it carried more meaning than it ever should have. It was as if their worlds were slowly merging, though neither of them had asked for it. Lyra had begun training him, teaching him more about her people and their ways. She was harsh, demanding more from him than any human instructor ever had. But there was something in her eyes that told Jackson she wasn't just testing him for his strength. She was testing his will, his ability to adapt. The more he learned, the more he realized how little he understood about the world he was on. There were customs, rituals, and ways of thinking that were entirely foreign to him. One morning, after a long day of training, Lyra took him to a secluded part of the alien city. The towering structures were unlike anything Jackson had seen on Earth. The buildings seemed to grow out of the ground, as if they were alive. The air here was thicker, filled with the hum of alien technology. Jackson marveled at the advanced tools and structures surrounding them, but his attention kept drifting back to Lyra. She was walking ahead of him, her posture regal, her movements graceful. He had never met anyone like her, not in his years of military service or his travels to distant planets. Lyra was more than just a leader. She was a force of nature, something Jackson could never quite wrap his mind around. Yet at the same time, there was something deeply human about her, something that made him want to understand her even more. They arrived at a large open courtyard. The stones beneath their feet were worn smooth by time, and the air felt charged, as if something important was about to happen. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes narrowing as she assessed him. "Do you understand now, human?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying an authority that made him pause. "Do you see the difference between us?" Jackson swallowed, unsure of what she meant. He had learned much about her people, their history, and their ways of life, but there was still a vast chasm between their cultures, and he wasn't sure how to bridge it. "I think I'm starting to understand," he replied cautiously. "But it's hard. You've got a way of doing things that's so different from what I know." Lyra studied him for a moment, as if deciding something. Then, with a sudden movement, she stepped closer to him, so close that Jackson could feel the heat of her body. His heart skipped a beat, but he stood his ground, unwilling to show any fear. "You must learn to accept this difference," she said, her voice low. "You must learn to respect me and my ways, even if you do not understand them." Jackson's pulse raced, but he nodded, his throat dry. He had always respected strength, but there was something about Lyra's presence that made respect feel like something deeper, something more personal. She wasn't just commanding him. She was challenging him to see the world through her eyes. "And what if I can't?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What if I can't accept it?" Lyra's eyes softened, but she didn't pull away. "Then we will part ways, human," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I believe you can. I see it in you. There is strength in you that even I can't ignore." Jackson's heart raced. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to challenge him in this way. But there was something in her words, something in the way she spoke, that made him realize how much he truly did respect her. This wasn't just about obeying orders or following rules. It was about learning to see the world in a way that wasn't limited by his own narrow view of what was possible. As he stood there, staring into her eyes, he realized that this wasn't just a test of strength. It was a test of everything he believed in. And for the first time, he wasn't sure where he stood. The following days passed in a blur of training and tests. Lyra pushed Jackson to his limits, testing not only his physical endurance but his mental strength. Every task felt harder than the last, and yet Jackson couldn't help but feel like he was growing. Growing stronger, but also something else. He was starting to understand her more, to see the depths beneath the strong, commanding exterior she always displayed. But the more he learned, the more questions he had. He couldn't understand why she was so intense, why she pushed him to the edge. There was no kindness in her words, only cold determination. Yet, somewhere beneath it all, Jackson began to sense something else. There were moments when her eyes would soften for just a second, or when her voice would lose its hard edge. He didn't know if she noticed, but Jackson was beginning to realize that Lyra, the strong alien leader, was hiding something. One evening, after another grueling training session, Jackson sat by the fire, trying to relax his sore muscles. The camp was quieter than usual, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant calls of alien creatures. He didn't mind the silence. In fact, it gave him a chance to reflect on everything that had happened in the past few weeks. His thoughts drifted back to Lyra, as they often did. Then, unexpectedly, she appeared. She was standing a few feet away, her silhouette outlined against the fading light of the twin moons. Her expression was unreadable, but Jackson could sense that something was different. "Jackson," she said softly, breaking the silence. He turned to face her, surprised to hear the softness in her voice. It was the first time he had heard her speak without that harsh command. "Lyra?" he asked cautiously. "What's going on? You don't usually." Lyra stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the fire. For a moment, she didn't answer. She simply stared into the flames, as if they held the answers to questions he wasn't ready to ask. "I've never told anyone this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not even my people." Jackson's curiosity piqued. Lyra, the mighty commander, was vulnerable. It was hard to believe, but the way she spoke, the way her shoulders slumped slightly, made him wonder. "I'm not who you think I am," she continued, her gaze distant. "I was born into a world that demanded strength, a world that told me my worth was only measured by how powerful I could be, and I became what they wanted me to be. Strong, unyielding, unforgiving." Jackson said nothing, unsure of what to say. He had always seen Lyra as a leader, someone who never showed weakness. But now, hearing her speak like this, he realized there was much more to her than he had imagined. "There are things I've had to do," Lyra continued, her voice shaking just a little. "Things I'm not proud of. And I carry them with me, every day. It's not easy, Jackson. You think I don't feel it, that I don't carry the weight of my decisions. I do." The words hit Jackson harder than he expected. He had never seen Lyra like this, so open, so raw. The walls she had built up were crumbling before his eyes. It wasn't easy for him to hear her speak of her past, but there was something in the way she trusted him enough to share it. It was an unexpected side of Lyra that he never thought he would see. "You don't have to be this way all the time," Jackson said quietly, unable to stop himself. He didn't know why he said it, but it felt right. "You don't have to carry all of that by yourself." Lyra turned her eyes toward him, her violet gaze searching his face for any sign of insincerity. There was none. She took a step closer to him, her expression softening for the first time. "I've never let anyone in," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But maybe you're right." Jackson could feel the weight of her words, the depth of her internal struggle. This wasn't just about a human and an alien fighting for respect anymore. It was about two people, each carrying their own burdens, finding a way to trust each other in a world that seemed determined to tear them apart. For the first time since he'd arrived on this alien world, Jackson felt like he wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, Lyra didn't have to be either. The next few days felt different to Jackson. There was an unspoken shift between him and Lyra after that conversation. They trained together, ate together, and worked side by side, but there was a quiet tension in the air that neither of them knew how to address. It wasn't just the weight of their differences anymore. It was something deeper, something neither of them could ignore. Jackson noticed it in the way Lyra looked at him. It was as if she was seeing him for the first time, no longer just as a human soldier, but as something more. The way her eyes lingered on him sometimes, how her voice softened when she spoke to him, told him everything he needed to know. But what did that mean? What did it mean for them? For their partnership, for the future? He couldn't stop thinking about it. At the same time, Jackson felt the growing confusion inside himself. The feelings he had been trying to ignore were now impossible to push aside. He was still a soldier. His mission hadn't changed. His duty to his people hadn't changed. But how could he focus on that when everything he'd been taught about his duty was now being challenged? Lyra had become more than just a leader to him. She had become someone he cared for deeply. The feeling was mutual, though neither of them was brave enough to say it aloud. One evening, after another intense training session, Lyra led Jackson to a quiet corner of the camp. She hadn't spoken much during the day, and Jackson was growing more and more curious about what was on her mind. "You've been distracted," she said, her voice direct but gentle. "What's going on inside your head?" Jackson looked at her, his heart racing. "I'm not distracted," he replied, though he knew he was lying. "I've just been focused on the mission." Lyra didn't seem convinced. She crossed her arms, her violet eyes narrowing slightly as she studied him. "You're lying, Jackson. I can tell." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't know how to explain it, how to put into words everything he was feeling. How could he explain to her that the more he learned about her, the more he admired her? That the more they spent time together, the more he found himself drawn to her in ways he hadn't expected. But even as the words were on the tip of his tongue, a part of him hesitated. Lyra was the leader of her people. She had her own duties, her own responsibilities. She couldn't be distracted by a human soldier's feelings. It wasn't right. "I'm just confused," Jackson said, his voice quieter now. "I didn't expect this, Lyra. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect this." Lyra's expression softened. She stepped closer, her presence as commanding as ever, yet somehow more comforting now. "You're not the only one who's confused," she said, her voice low. "I've been pushed my whole life to be strong, to be unyielding. I've always told myself I couldn't let anyone get close, couldn't let anyone in. But now I'm not so sure." Jackson looked into her eyes, seeing the same uncertainty he felt reflected there. It was as if they were both standing on the edge of something they didn't fully understand, unsure of whether to take the leap or pull back. "I don't know what this is," she continued, her voice shaky for the first time. "But I can't ignore it, and I don't want to." The words hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. The tension that had been building over the past few days finally broke, and for the first time, Jackson allowed himself to be honest. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt like a promise. Then, with a steady breath, Jackson spoke. "I don't know what this means either, but I don't want to ignore it either." For a long moment, they simply stood there, staring at each other. Neither of them knew what the future would hold, or what this growing connection meant. But in that moment, they knew that they had crossed a line. They had moved past the roles they had been forced into, commander and soldier. And now, they were simply two people, unsure of what would come next. The quiet that had settled over the camp was shattered the next morning by an urgent call. A massive threat had appeared on the horizon. Alien forces from a neighboring planet had launched an attack. The peaceful world they were on was no longer safe, and Jackson knew that everything he had learned about this place was about to be tested. Lyra was calm as always, but there was a fire in her eyes, a sharp focus that Jackson couldn't ignore. The leader inside her had emerged, and she was ready to fight. He, on the other hand, wasn't sure what to expect. This wasn't just a battle of strength. It was a fight for the survival of a world he had only just begun to understand. As Jackson and Lyra prepared for battle, the tension between them still lingered, but now it was replaced by a shared sense of purpose. The mission had changed. It was no longer just about understanding each other's cultures. It was about surviving, about protecting this place from the threat that had come from beyond the stars. "Stay close to me, human," Lyra said, her voice sharp and commanding. "I'll guide you through the battlefield. Trust me." Jackson nodded, but his mind was racing. He had been in combat before, but this was different. These weren't just aliens he was fighting. They were fighting for the future of a world he had grown to care about, and fighting beside Lyra made everything feel more personal. They arrived at the front line, where the battle had already begun. Explosions lit up the sky, and the sounds of weapons and shouting filled the air. Jackson gripped his rifle tightly, scanning the chaos around him. But his eyes kept drifting back to Lyra, her presence unmistakable as she led the charge, moving with purpose and precision. She was a warrior through and through. Lyra noticed him looking. "Focus, Jackson," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "Keep your head in the game." Jackson snapped back to attention, heart pounding in his chest. The alien forces were relentless, but they were also disorganized. It was clear they hadn't expected resistance like this. As they fought their way through the enemy lines, Jackson couldn't help but notice how well Lyra commanded. She wasn't just a leader in name. She was a fighter, a protector. Her skills were unmatched, and it made Jackson realize just how much he had underestimated her. They fought side by side, moving through the battlefield as if they had done it for years. But as they approached the heart of the enemy's position, things started to shift. A massive alien ship appeared in the sky, hovering just above them. It was an imposing sight, its dark silhouette blocking out the sun. Lyra stopped in her tracks, her expression hardening. "This is bad," she muttered. "That ship is their command center." Jackson's stomach tightened. They couldn't let that ship land, not with its firepower. "We have to stop it," Jackson said, determined. "What do we do?" Lyra's eyes softened, just for a moment. "We fight. We can't let them win." With a sharp nod, they moved toward the ship, using the cover of wreckage and debris to hide their movements. The closer they got, the more Jackson could feel the intensity of the fight. Every step felt like it could be their last. Yet, despite the danger, there was a strange sense of calm inside him. He was with Lyra. They were in this together. Just as they reached the base of the ship, an explosion rocked the ground beneath them. The shockwave knocked them both off their feet, sending them crashing to the ground. Jackson shook his head, disoriented, but he saw Lyra already getting to her feet, her face grim. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice filled with urgency. Together, they climbed toward the ship's entrance, determined to stop the enemy once and for all. The fate of the planet, and the future of their relationship, now rested in their hands. The explosion had thrown Jackson and Lyra to the ground, but they didn't have time to recover. The chaos around them was growing louder, and the enemy's forces were closing in. The large alien ship hovered above them, casting an ominous shadow over the battlefield. Time was running out, and the pressure was on. They had to stop the ship from landing, or the entire planet would fall into enemy hands. Jackson shook off the dust and debris, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the weight of the moment. They had come so far, and yet now they were standing on the edge of everything they had worked for. They couldn't afford to fail, not now. Lyra, ever the leader, was already moving, her eyes focused and her posture commanding. Despite the explosion and the danger surrounding them, she moved with the confidence of someone who had faced death countless times before. She knew what had to be done, and Jackson would follow her, no matter the cost. "Follow me, Jackson," Lyra said, her voice firm. "We take down that ship, or we die trying." There was no hesitation in her words. Jackson could see it in her eyes. She wasn't afraid. She was determined. And in that moment, Jackson realized that he wasn't just fighting alongside Lyra because of his mission. He was fighting for her, for them, for the world they both had grown to care about. The two of them made their way toward the ship, keeping low to avoid enemy fire. The battlefield was a blur of flashing lights, explosions, and the sounds of weapons firing. Jackson's pulse was racing, but he kept his focus. He couldn't afford to be distracted, not now. As they neared the ship's base, they encountered a group of enemy soldiers. Jackson's training kicked in, and he quickly took them out, covering Lyra as she moved forward with swift precision. They made an excellent team, each anticipating the other's moves, their trust in each other growing stronger with every step. Finally, they reached the ship's entrance. It loomed in front of them, a massive metal structure with armed guards standing watch. Jackson glanced at Lyra, ready to charge in, but she stopped him with a single gesture. "Wait," she whispered, her voice low. "I need you to trust me." Jackson nodded, his heart racing. He trusted her. He had to. She stepped forward, moving silently, almost ghost-like, as she took down one guard, then another. Jackson followed her lead, staying close but allowing her to take the lead. The tension was unbearable as they reached the ship's hatch. The door opened with a hiss, and the interior was revealed. A maze of corridors and weapons. They were in the heart of the enemy's command center now. There was no turning back. Lyra's eyes flashed with determination. "This is it, Jackson," she said, her voice steady. "We stopped them here." They moved swiftly through the corridors, taking out enemies as they went. The further they went, the more the stakes felt personal. This wasn't just a mission for Jackson anymore. It was a fight for survival, for the people he had come to care about, and for the strange, powerful woman who had become so much more than a leader to him. Finally, they reached the control room. The commander of the enemy forces was there, surrounded by a team of soldiers. He was a towering figure, his eyes cold and unfeeling. But when he saw Lyra, his expression changed. He knew who she was. "You," the commander sneered, stepping forward. "I knew you would come, but you're too late." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "I'm never too late," she said, her voice filled with fury. In that moment, Jackson saw something in her he had never seen before. Pure, unfiltered rage. This was personal for her, and he would stand by her, no matter what happened next. With one final push, they stormed the control room, and the battle began. The fate of the planet, and the future of their bond, was now in their hands. The control room was a nightmare of flashing lights, loud alarms, and the echo of gunfire. The moment they stormed in, chaos erupted. The enemy commander, a massive alien with cold, calculating eyes, shouted orders to his soldiers, but they were already too late. Jackson and Lyra moved like one, their movements fluid and coordinated as they took down anyone who stood in their way. Lyra was unstoppable, her every move precise and deadly. Jackson was right behind her, focused and determined. He had fought in countless battles, but this felt different. This battle wasn't just for survival. It was for something more. It was for the future of the world he had grown to care about. And it was for Lyra, the powerful alien woman who had shown him that there was more to life than duty and orders. Jackson had always believed in following commands, in doing what he was told. But now, standing beside Lyra, he understood that sometimes the most important thing was the person standing next to you, the person who trusted you, and the person you trusted in return. The enemy soldiers fell one by one, but the commander was still standing, his smug expression never faltering. He was tall, his body armored in dark, imposing gear, but Jackson could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was losing. "You think you can defeat me?" The commander snarled. "You are nothing but a human, and she is nothing but a traitor to her kind." Lyra's eyes burned with fury as she stepped forward. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady. "I've never been a traitor. I've been fighting for the wrong reasons, but that ends now." The commander sneered. "Then you are weak. You've abandoned your own people for a human. You'll regret that." Jackson could feel the tension between them, the weight of the commander's words. But he didn't care. He was with Lyra now, and nothing could change that. The bond they shared was stronger than any of the threats this alien commander could throw at them. "You're the one who's weak," Jackson said, his voice firm. "You've been hiding behind fear, behind power, for too long. It's over." Without another word, Lyra lunged forward, her weapon drawn. The commander barely had time to react before she struck, taking him down with a swift blow. The battle was over. As the control room fell silent, Jackson and Lyra stood side by side, their breathing heavy from the fight. They had won, but it wasn't just the victory they were both thinking about. It was what came next. Lyra turned to Jackson, her face softening. For the first time, there was no command in her gaze, only gratitude and something deeper, something more personal. "You did it," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "We did it." Jackson nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We did." For a long moment, they stood there, looking at each other. The world around them had been torn apart by war, but in this moment, there was peace between them. They had fought side by side, and they had won. But more than that, they had found something in each other that neither had expected, something that had been growing between them, even in the middle of the chaos. Lyra stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. Jackson took her hand in his, holding it firmly. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. Together." In that moment, everything seemed possible. The future was uncertain. But for the first time, Jackson felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. By Lyra's side, fighting for something greater than just survival. It was a new beginning. And together, they would face whatever came next.